I had just finished my first year of university and had taken up a position as a taxi dispatcher with my boyfriend's cousin's taxi company. For the first week and a half, I worked mainly day shifts until the owner decided to extend the hours to 24/7, and I was the lucky employee who would be covering 3 of the 4 of these shifts a week. The next week, I was working my first night shift alone. The driver would be out all night looking for fares, which meant a lot of the night would be just me. I wasn't uneasy working such a shift by myself since I had worked at a 24-hour coffee shop and was used to midnight shifts. It was also a Wednesday or Thursday night, so it wasn't very busy. The best part about this job was that my boss let me use the internet to play video games on my laptop in the office. From the computer desk in the office, I could see the front door, a portion of the front desk, and most of the front windows, so I could keep a close eye on what was happening outside. Plus, the bell above the door always alerted me to a new customer, so I couldn't be caught off guard if I got too into my game. On this particular night, I was working with a taxi driver named Dave. Dave is about 6'3" and 300 pounds, plus he suffers from severe health problems, one of which made all of his movements slow and painful. He definitely wasn't Mr. Fitness or the type of person who would be able to defend himself or others very easily. Sometime during the early hours of the morning, around 1:30 to 2 a.m., Dave gets a call to go pick up someone in a town about 15 minutes away. He gathered up his stuff and drove into the night, while I headed into the office and continued playing my video game. About 15 minutes later, I caught something over the top of my laptop. My mind froze. I could hear panting, and in the reflection of the window I could see someone sitting in one of the waiting chairs. I walked to the doorway that connects the front room with the office. I glanced into the sitting area and nearly shit bricks. Some guy with a massive rat tail had managed to ninja his way into the office and was now sitting in one of the chairs with his face buried in his hands, panting heavily. He was dirty, sweaty, and sounded like he had just run a marathon. Now, the rat tail should have tipped me off, but I found it more hilarious than frightening. A few moments passed and I finally built up the courage to ask him if he needed a cab. He didn't respond at first. I asked him again, and he looks up at me. I took a step back into the office. His face was scratched and covered in blood from the wound on the top of his head. I was shocked and immediately offered assistance to him. He replies with, "I'm fine. I don't need no help. I just want to go home." I asked him if he needed a cab and, if so, where he was going. He told me he lives about 20 minutes away and wants Dave to take him home. After that, shit started to get weird. I called over to Dave using the radio to tell him that there was a fare in the office and that he wanted a ride. He told me he'd be another 10 minutes or so. My hand was on the phone the entire time in case this guy made any sudden movements. Instead of going back into the office, I decided it was best to stay out front where there are 2 great big bay windows that make it easy to see what is happening inside the taxi office. I didn't feel as though he was a threat at all, but he seemed really angry at something, so I wanted to make sure that if something happened to me, people would be able to see it. So I walked out into the front room, and as I get closer to the gentleman, that's when I see it. He's not just bleeding from the head, but from the shoulder and knee. I asked him again if he's okay, then I offered to call an ambulance for him. Bad idea.
"You don't need to be doing that,"
he told me.
"It ain't like I killed nobody, right? I never killed nobody. Don't go doing that. You don't need to call anyone. I just want to go home."
"I'm sorry. I just noticed that you're bleeding pretty badly and thought maybe you'd like someone to make sure you're okay," I replied.
"I didn't kill nobody. That asshole should have kept his mouth shut. He had what was coming to him. He shouldn't have said those things. But it ain't like I killed nobody. You don't need to call nobody. I just want to go home."
"Okay," I tell him. "But you're bleeding."
"It ain't like I killed nobody,"
he replied.
"I swear I didn't kill nobody. Please don't call the cops. I don't need the cops. I just need to go home. I didn't kill anyone."
Silence for a few minutes. He notices the phone clutched in my hand.
I fell down,
he blurted out.
Pardon? I fell,
he repeated.
That's why I'm bleeding. I fell. It ain't like I killed nobody.
He suddenly got up and started pacing. He was growing impatient for his cab, and I was scared shitless. Blood was now on the chair and floor. I had the phone in my hand, and every once in a while he broke the silence with another string of incoherent babbling about how he had done nothing wrong because he hadn't killed anyone, and that I didn't need to call the cops because he was a good guy. Eventually Dave radios over that he's about 2 minutes away, and I breathe a sigh of relief. He pulled up out front. The man gets into the car and they drive off. Now I'm worried for Dave, so I call the cops. I reported what happened, and they followed the taxi cab to this guy's house where they arrested him. Turns out this guy had run away from a nearby bar after he had physically assaulted a fellow patron. To what extent, I never found out. He injured him with a sharp object, I assume a pocket knife or needle, took off running, fell and managed to find his way to the taxi office. During his time in the cab office, the police had been searching for him. So technically no, he didn't kill anyone, but he did assault and attempt to murder someone. I also found out that one of the other drivers, Steven, knew the guy from high school years ago. His name is Duke, which explains the rat tail, and he has a history of violence. He also has a history of coming home drunk and cracking his wife's skull open from time to time. Whether he had planned to that night, I couldn't say. But I'm just glad that the guy ended up in the drunk tank for the night. His wife was unharmed, and the guy who got stabbed apparently didn't die. At least, I assume he didn't, since I still see Duke every now and then walking the streets with his glorious rat tail, which means he didn't get arrested. But in all seriousness, I wish you guys could have seen this rat tail. That thing was impressive. Okay, a little backstory before I tell you one of the crazy experiences of mine that happened during my 2-year security career from 2013 to 2015. I'm a 6'7" male in Australia. I'd like to think I'm a fairly tough and intimidating guy, but some of the shit that used to go on at the mall I used to work the night shift for still gives me goosebumps to this day. So the mall I worked at was a very, very large, probably the largest in my state, I'd say. And all the way up to about 8:30 p.m. it would still be quite busy. Only around 9:30 would we be able to manage to usher all of the stragglers out, and only at about 11 p.m. would all of the business owners have left. My job was basically to patrol the mall and make sure there was no one sticking around after the doors were closed during the night. We didn't have guns or batons, only a can of mace that we very rarely used. There were multiple occasions where we would find would-be thieves hiding around, trying to break into shops after dark, but they were normally far outnumbered by the 4 to 5 of us on shift at the time, and they would usually be intimidated by me or some of the other imposing members of security. This one night, though, shit started getting really weird for me on the night shift. So I'd say it was about 2 o'clock, and I was standing in the middle of the empty food court eating a sandwich. This is the only part of the mall that had any light at nighttime due to the skylight, so it was comfortable to eat there. While I was eating, though, I heard a dull scraping noise from the hallway leading off from the food courts into some toilets. It sounded like a piece of metal dragging across the floor. I was immediately put on edge, and I flicked on my torch, flashlight, without a moment of hesitation. I can remember creeping down the hallway, flashlight in hand, illuminating a good 6 or 7 meters in front of me. As I got closer and closer to the end of the hall, the noise became louder and louder, until I was at the end of the hallway, and there was the toilet doors to the left and right of me. I could tell the sound was coming from the female toilets, though. I gripped the handle and opened the door to a tiny little crack. The noise was now very clear, and had me not scared, but confused. I yelled.
Oi, who's in there?
The noise quickly stopped. I paused a moment, listening hard through the tiny cracks of the door, and I swear to fucking God I could hear breathing. Low, male breathing. I shut the door, still gripping the handle tightly, and flicked on my radio.
This is 1-3. I need help in the food court bathrooms. I think someone's here.
No response. This was really strange, and it put me further on edge. Policy was to always answer the radio, and now I was truly becoming quite alarmed.
This is 1-3. Does anyone copy?
Still no response. I can remember whispering to myself, "What the actual fuck?" I again opened the door a tiny crack.
Listen, mate,
I said, sounding as intimidating as possible.
If you don't fucking come out with your hands up, you're gonna end up eating your teeth tonight. Do you want that?
I sat there at the door, quite honestly terrified at this point, but there was no response. In fact, now there was no noise at all. I yelled into the bathroom.
Okay, mate, I'm coming in. If you do anything stupid, it's not my fault. You'll never walk again.
I tried my hardest to sound scary, but my voice was quivering at this point. This whole situation made no sense at all. Why would someone be in the female bathrooms? What was the metal noise? What the fuck is even happening? I very slowly opened the door and scanned my flashlight slowly across the room. All the cubicles were open, which was weird. But other than that, the bathroom was totally empty. I was totally shitting myself about now. I was definitely losing it. I walked into the center of the bathroom, closing the door behind me. Scared to the core, I let out a faint, "This is some horror movie shit, eh? Come out," when I heard the long, whining squeak of the door behind me. I span around, basically crying at this point, and shone my torch on a fucking massive man, at least a head taller than me, or so it seemed in my state at the time. He was Caucasian, and at least in his 40s, with matte gray hair all over his forehead. He was mid-opening the door, but he stopped dead still in the middle of his action. He just looked at me, smiling this guilty fucking smile like a kid would make when he gets caught stealing biscuits or some shit like that. I'm not going to lie. I was so scared I froze. He lifted his finger to his mouth before swinging the door open all the way and sprinting out with what looked like some type of small metal box in his hand. Turns out he was just behind the toilet when I was opening it, and I totally missed him. I was so fucking close to him, I didn't even fucking notice him. He could have killed me if he had a knife or something, and that thought still haunts me to this day. Later that night, my radio miraculously started working again, and I got right on telling my coworkers about my story. They collectively went pale when I told them what happened. They all had similar stories, but none that were as much of a close shave as mine. I only worked the night shift for another week after that before I quit. I wasn't sticking around a job like that, especially due to the fact that my radio just shit itself. I also never found out whatever happened to that guy.
Back in 2007, I started a tech job with an IP, phone, long-distance company. The company is no longer around, and honestly, I don't even know how they stayed in business as long as they did. It was really just a pyramid scam, but thankfully I was on the IT side of things, so I didn't have to sell anything. It was a small typical tech support call center. The customers would call in, or Verizon Quest would call and say DT1 lines were down, or there were outages. I was the only female on the team, having to prove myself. It didn't take long, and the customers respected me for being able to handle things. After making my mark, I decided to take the 10-hour night shifts. I worked Wednesday through Saturday, from 1 p.m. to 12 a.m., with an hour for lunch at 6 p.m. I was completely alone in the whole building. The rush to get out of the office at 6 p.m. was insane. I couldn't blame them, but I decided having 3 days off was better than 2. Like I said, I was by myself most nights. I would have to keep an eye on emails and make sure I answered all the calls. It was often a very slow shift. I would get a lot of video game, reading, and schoolwork done during this time, but sometimes I would just wander the building, walk all around just to get away from my desk for a time. I would have the phone system connected to my cell phone so no calls would be missed. This allowed me to go get a soda or get food and so on. One time when I was away from my desk, I was going down to the lunch room to grab a soda. The vending machine is on the basement floor. The basement had a wall of windows and one set of security doors, same for the main entrance, only there was one camera facing that door, but nothing else really to make me feel safe. I didn't like to go down to the basement much, because the back of the building faced an acre of dark woods. There was a walking path to the woods, but for some reason they didn't install lights for the walking path. Not really sure why that was, but it didn't help for the creepy factor. Sometimes I would see animals run past, but other times it felt like someone was watching me. I always tried my best to make it fast when I was getting a soda or a snack, but sometimes it didn't feel fast enough. So one night, I was making my way down to the basement of the building to get a soda. It was a slow dragging night, and I needed a little bit of caffeine for a pick-me-up. I counted my money as I walked to make sure I had enough. That way I would get in and get out quick. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw something dart from the glass door back into the darkness. I stopped dead in my tracks and tried to scan the forest, but like I said, it was just total blackness. I felt a bit of unease, and everything told me to turn on my heels and go back to my desk. But it was 9 p.m., and I had a fair bit of time left on my shift before I could blow this pop stand. I tried shaking the feeling off and briskly walked over to the soda machines and made my selection. The soda dropped, and as I bent over to get it, I heard a loud ping noise. It was as if someone had hit the glass with something. I stood straight up, and I felt the hair on my back and neck stand up. I slowly turned around and was completely scared that I would see someone out there. But as I made my full turn, I saw once again nothing but darkness. I thought this was a good time to book it back up to the main floor. I didn't even bother with the elevator. I went up the stairs, and I ran up them. My heart was already racing from having to go down there in the first place. Then the loud bang, now running up 2 flights of stairs. Once I got back to the desk, I sunk down in my chair and tried my best to calm down. It was just a noise. I was in the building with locked doors and locked inner offices. I kept saying over and over again in my head, it was nothing. I was relieved by that. But out of nowhere, I got a feeling that someone was watching me again. I peeked my head over the cubicle wall and looked around my office. Nothing seemed out of place until I turned towards the front of the building. Outside the first set of doors was a slender, tall, dirty male. He was cupping his hands around his eyes, trying to see past the reflection of the light inside. I dropped back down in my cubicle before he caught sight of me. He didn't look like anyone I had ever seen before in these offices, and it was a little past 9 p.m. There was no good reason why he was checking my office. As I sat in my chair, I heard the door shake. I slowly stood up and watched him pull the handles of the door, but they didn't budge to my relief. But as I watched him, he turns and faces me. His face looked bruised or dirty, I couldn't tell which. Once his eyes locked mine, he started banging the door harder and smacking the glass. I was so scared. It was the middle of the night. I was by myself and in the middle of the office building complex. I grabbed my headset and dialed 911. While getting an operator on the line, the guy was walking back and forth from one side of the glass door to the next. 911, what is your emergency? I need someone to come out here. There's a guy trying to break into my office building. While speaking to her, the guy disappeared from view. I tried to look in all directions, but I didn't see him. I knew that he wouldn't just walk off, not with how hard he was banging. All of a sudden, a good-sized rock came out of nowhere and smashed against the door. I screamed and went under my desk. The operator asked what happened, and I explained. She asked me if the glass was broken enough to let him in. I didn't want to stand up and look, But she told me in order to know where he was, I had to crawl from under my desk and peek over my cubicle. So I crawled out from under my desk and peeked over my cubicle wall and saw a huge crack down the first part of the door. I sank back down and told her, "Please have the police hurry." She said they were on their way. I've read tons of stories on this subreddit, and people say that the cops couldn't get there fast enough. They aren't kidding. It felt like time is standing still, and there's nothing you can do. Another smash against the door, but along with the glass breaking sounds, I could hear sirens coming towards my building. It was music to my ears. I told the operator that the police had arrived and thanked her for her support. I stood back up and looked over the cubicle wall, and all I could see was blue and red lights flashing wildly. But the thing is, I couldn't see where the man was. The top part of the door was completely smashed, and the rock was lying inside the entryway. One officer came to the front door, and the others were combing the area. The first officer that came into the building was a very kind man. He was patient with me and let me explain what I saw and what happened. Soon later, my boss arrived and checked up on me and the damage. At some point, my husband was called and was told that I would be escorted home by one of the officers. I took the next few days off and started looking for another job where I wasn't by myself all night. I went on to leave this job a month later and started at a credit card machine company. It was an office full of people, still a call center, but I felt safer, especially with the security cameras all over the building. Like I said before, this company is no longer around. It was bought by another company, and they basically liquidated all the funds. So dirty man who tried to break into my office, let's never meet again.